Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, when we talk films, this is who we go to. Certified film critic. Thank you very much. Luis Mendez, Mendez Movie Report. You see him here frequently. Y'all love him because I've seen the feedback. How you doing, my friend? How's it in sunny, warm South Florida?
Well, it's not so sunny and warm these days. It's got it dealing with cold to the point that literally my parents, just a few miles north of me, had their bound and freeze, stiff solid. It is not feeling like Florida these days.
Well, at least the Buccaneers are playing well. Anyway, that's a little jab. I'm sorry. You have your 25 list of your favorite movies for the year up at ordinary-times.com. You always do great work. I want to ask you a couple big picture questions. We'll get to I want to save the top two for the end because I think it's a really interesting juxtaposition, the two that you put top two here. There was two things on your list that really struck out to me. The first one is you had a lot of animation on this one, especially if we consider Del Toro animation, which it was. You got a lot of animation on your list this year, my friend.
Yeah, and the thing is that with the exception of one, which is honestly kind of unconventional for this company, Disney didn't really show up all that much. Lightyear is a movie that I like, but the more time passes, it hasn't been aging as well with me. Turning Red, I really like, but I didn't think it was like special either. I thought it was a pretty off year for Pixar in general. But yeah, I've got Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, which is honestly probably the first ever Pinocchio adaptation that I would say goes toe to toe with the 1940 classic. I've got Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, which is the kind of movie that a lot of people have been discovering and kind of getting teary-eyed over. Some people have compared it to almost like Paddington in the way that it plays. And then you have Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which was really part of what has been one of the biggest stories of this year, and that's sequels that have found a way to surpass their originals. And this is a animated movie that shocked me how good it was. I've actually seen the movie 3 times now. I'm not personally the biggest Shrek movie fan, and I thought that watching the first Puss in Boots, I thought that was just decent at best. But this really has incredible animation, interesting themes about confronting death that I thought were made for a really all-around great movie for everybody. And there was the Disney Plus film Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, which is a movie that if you watch it, you will be surprised that Disney actually greenlit some of the jokes that they have. And now I mentioned some of the cameos from various characters from the world of animation. But yeah, I mean, even though it wasn't the greatest year for Disney animation and Pixar in general, there were still a lot of great original animated films to check out.
Yeah, movie critic Luis Mendez joining us. The other thing that really struck me on your list is there's a lot of overseas films on this list, especially if we're going to count the English stuff as overseas, which I think we should. A lot of foreign films on here, even though a lot of them are English language. A lot of overseas films in this list this year.
Yeah, so I thought it was a great year in terms of some British films that we got. Downton Abbey, A New Era, obviously that was going to make the list because of how much I love that, I guess, TV series, franchise, whatever you want to call it now. The Miss Harris Goes to Paris, which was an incredibly well-made movie of a book that has been adapted like a million times on TV and film. And Leslie Manville with a performance that we do not typically see from her, and she knocked it out of the park. Beautiful cinematography, incredible costume design on that movie. Living, which is a remake of 1952's Ikaru, with Bill Nighy having what could end up being an Oscar-nominated performance. The Outfit, a very Hitchcock type of movie from a screenplay writer Graham Moore, his directorial debut. The Northman from Robert Eggers. He is a director that I've always liked his atmospheric feel, the way that he directs things, but I've never really loved the film of his. This is his most accessible movie. It's almost like Hamlet being played out in the Viking world. And then, of course, we got non-English stuff like Bardo, which I think it really was received well by a lot of the Hispanic critics because there's a lot there to identify with. It is a long movie. It does have, it's not for everybody. It's a movie that at my critic screening we actually had walkouts on. And then there's RRR, which has become the big worldwide sensation out of India. It may have a real shot to actually get nominated for Best Picture. It is a bombastic film with incredible action scenes, amazing dance sequences. Is the kind of movie that's really opened the gates for people to check out Indian cinema more, which some would say it's about time, considering that India has a very rich Hollywood history of movies that unfortunately they haven't gotten as much love out here in the West.
Yeah, Author Mendez joining us. Listen, you need to talk to us about this RRR movie because we don't, look, America, especially the English-speaking world, we get a little insular on things like this. This is a monster all-timer of a movie by any measure. This thing is breaking all kinds of records. It's currently like the third biggest Indian movie. They think eventually it may get that top spot over time. They've had to keep re-releasing it. That's how popular this thing is. Just talk about it for a minute. I know you called it bombastic when you wrote your actual review about it. You just talked about how this is the most over-the-top action thing you've ever seen. This is the way it should be seen. You would, I'm going to quote you here. You say, I defy Hollywood to come up with something as original and as in your face as this is. Talk to people about this movie because worldwide for India cinema, this is going to be one of their tentpole type movies in their canon. That's how big this thing is.
Yeah, and like I said, I couldn't believe watching people who had seen this movie how interested they suddenly became in Indian cinema. I've seen Indian films show up on my among my letterbox mutuals like I've never seen before because of this movie. Look, this movie literally, I feel like it has everything you can find in Indian cinema. I mean, it's got incredible action sequences over the top, like you said. The dance sequences are amazing. There's one song and dance sequence, Natu Natu, which actually just got shortlisted at the Oscars for Best Song. There is a full-blown Bollywood dance at the end of the movie. I mean, it's a 3-hour epic. It does have a proper intermission and everything, but it's a 3-hour epic. But I think it's going to be kind of hard for some folks to feel the length with how hardcore this movie is, especially after about the first hour or so. It just, I mean, we're talking about everything from a guy jumping out of a truck with a bunch of animals side by side with them. We're talking about two dudes rescuing a kid while there's fire around them in a lake. We're talking about an explosion, and these two dudes are climbing up the building as it's exploding. I mean, delivers everything that you could want, whether you're an action fan, if you're just interested in Indian cinema in general. I mean, the thing is that India controversially did not pick this as their international submission for the Oscar, and yet it's been sweeping the critic awards for international feature, and it's beating out incredibly respected movies like Decision to Leave or All Quiet on the Western Front. It really has become a very word of mouth grassroots campaign for the film.
Yeah, Luis Mendez joining us. One of our tropes that you and me talk about frequently, especially as we get into award season here first of the year, is Hollywood loves their movies about Hollywood, right? There's one on your list. You've got it all the way up at number 4, but it's very divisive as far as the audience and the critics. Babylon. Now, it's got a lot of star power on it. Brad Pitt's in it. Margot Robbie's in it. It's visually, you can just tell by the trailer, this thing is hardcore. but you really loved it. But you also touched on it. This thing's kind of divisive. It's not a normal movie. It's not a normal Hollywood love letter to itself type of things. You described it this way in ordinary-times.com. You said it's like a marriage between Boogie Nights, Wolf of Wall Street, and Singing in the Rain. That's quite the three-way. Can you explain that a little better for us?
Yeah, I mean, this movie is not. I mean, it's not so much a love letter to Hollywood. It's definitely a love letter to the idea of cinema and storytelling, but it is not a love letter to Hollywood. It does not cast Hollywood in the greatest light. It's very raw. About the first 50, no, about first 10 minutes of the movie, there are certain bodily function jokes that are in there that might be hard for some folks to get past. Uh, it really goes all in on that 20s debauchery that everybody has read about. And then as the movie goes along and we see Hollywood transition from silent to sound and things like the Hays Code coming in and stuff like that, you really see how it affects our characters and how they've been having trouble transitioning. But it's a dark comedy. The jokes are at the expense of our characters. It is a 3-hour movie. It is a lengthy one, and that's another big thing that we saw this year was a lot of very lengthy movies. 4 3-hour films, which 4 out of the 5 happen to be my top 5. It's the kind of movie that I even said it in my written review. I was so conflicted because on one hand, it is easily Damien Chazelle's sloppiest film because there are moments that I really think could have been cut down. There are things that I think could have been refined with the screenplay, and yet it's so high on my list because from a subjective standpoint, it is such. I mean, for me, it was such a fun ride. I really loved the score is incredible. The way that it kind of transports you back to that time and era is amazing. I think the ending, which is one of the most ballsy things I've ever seen a director do with a period piece, I was all in on it. I was in for that ride. I've seen the movie 4 times now, and but it is undoubtedly it's if it gets into the best picture race at the Oscars, which for now I do think it's going to get in there. It's going to be that one movie we get every year, like a Don't Look Up, like a Vice, like a Bohemian Rhapsody, like a Wolf of Wall Street, where there's just very divisive views on it, but the passion is there to get it into the race. But yeah, I mean, it's again, it's not going to be for everybody. But for me, I was all in on the ride. I think it's a fun movie. It's funny. It's interesting. It's got moments that I had me on the edge of my seat. But I mean, it is a divisive movie. And it is a movie that's struggling at the box office. But unfortunately, that is a big story that we've been seeing continuing with these adult dramas.
Yeah, Luis Mendez joining us. One of the narratives for the last year or two, and you and I have talked about this a lot when you're on the show. You've wrote about it quite a bit when you write at Ordinary Times, and it's your own site, your Substack, Mendez Movie Report, which everybody should go subscribe to. We'll make sure to link to it. Only you slid Thor: Love and Thunder in at 20. Marvel's had a very uneven, whatever you want to call this current era, phase 4, post Endgame, whatever you call it. Just objectively, it's been very uneven, to be charitable. It's been a lot up and down. You went ahead and put Thor in here, but you even mentioned it on the piece, and I think it's something to talk about. Marvel overarching is you said it here. It's like, look, this is very much a comedic movie. Yes, there's the action. Yes, there's the sarcastic humor. All those Marvel things we think of. Christian Bale got a lot of praise for his performance as a villain here, but this is a comedic role now. The Thor movies are comedic. They're humor. That's a departure from how this Thor character started, and it's kind of a microcosm of what's going on with the Marvel as a whole. Of they trying to reinvent it, they're trying to keep it fresh, but it's getting some hits and misses as they do that, isn't it?
Yeah, and again, I'm one of the bigger MCU defenders you'll find among critics, but there's no doubt about it. There's a formula, and some people, the formula's starting to wane on some. It's starting to get just old for a lot of people out there. They won't admit it, but I truly believe that they didn't have a plan after Thanos. Now, I do think that they sort of have a plan now as we enter this new phase 5. But phase 4 was a mess in terms of planning out. It was a very divisive phase. You have movies that had, I mean, you had their first, even though it's a movie I defend, but you had their first ever movie that went rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. You had a massive hit like with No Way Home. Black Panther: Wakanda Forever has actually been a pretty decent awards player for them this year. It may lead to Angela Bassett getting a supporting actress nomination. But all in all, it really has been much more up and down with these last 2 years with them. It's almost like they've had to deal with a little bit of humble pie. Now, they do still make a lot of money. It's still Marvel. People still go and see them. But even by Marvel standards, they haven't necessarily been as consistently having these $1 billion hits like they used to. So, the movies are still making a lot of money, but they're not making as much money as they used to. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how do they bounce back with this new phase now that supposedly they do have a plan going forward. Where apparently they're going to be calling this sort of the multiverse saga. Because I do think that if they're not careful, this could only get worse for them and it slip up. And look, I put Love and Thunder in there, but I mean, I'll be the first to admit that it is not a movie you're going to see really show up in a lot of these. I might be the only critic who puts it in one of these, but it doesn't also help that this was a big year for non-MCU blockbusters, to the point that we're actually seeing what could end up being the most mainstream friendly Oscar lineup that I have maybe ever seen since I started following the Oscars. And I think it's because a lot of the industry really appreciates these movies not following the Marvel formula and then becoming these massive hits at the box office. And that's something that the MCU is going to have to look out for, that now you're starting to see these non-MCU movies are going to break the formula. They're going to challenge Marvel, and they may even end up getting into awards conversation.
Yeah. And we're going to talk more awards with you here in a couple of weeks as we really start getting into award season. Luis Mendez, certified critic, double board certified critic, if you were a heart surgeon, they would say. Luis Mendez, our good friend from the Mendez Movie Report. Okay, I'm going to combine two of the movies on your list on here, even though they're different, but business-wise, they're the two biggest movies of the year. And they're the two most talked about movies of the year in the American box office by far, and it's not really close. You have them combined, one at 5 and one at 6 on your list, Top Gun Maverick and Avatar: The Way of Water. This is kind of the opposite of the Marvel formula. They are both sequels, but both of them, and I have not watched Avatar because I don't like Avatar. I watched Top Gun 3 times in the theaters, and everybody knows me in theaters. Theater is not my favorite place. I went to that movie 3 times in the theater. I saw it the first time in IMAX, and then I wanted to see it in a regular screen because IMAX, you can't see everything. So then I watched it in my stadium seating theater that I normally go to. But that's how much I love that movie. Those two together, though, when you start looking at the money list for the box office, it's them, and then there's a bit of a drop before you start getting to everything else. Business-wise, there's that theme again. Sequels that improved, at least on box office and critical reception, on the original, although Avatar's probably not going to make the money of the first one, which was the biggest of all time for a period. Talk about those two movies and how they're being viewed.
Well, I mean, I think that they're probably the ones who are leading that, like I was just talking about, where the industry is kind of looking for non-MCU franchise blockbuster hits. And not only do I think these two movies are in the best picture race, I would even argue that they're in the top 5 on the overall ballot for the best picture race. I think there's a lot of appreciation and love for a big money-making franchise films that are not following the MCU formula. They're not superhero movies. And I mean, Top Gun Maverick and I would argue Avatar: Way of Water. I think both of them are better than the original films. Um, Even though I am a Top Gun defender, I think that first film gets a little bit too much flack. But
Careful now. I love that movie. We will
no. I'm saying
we will have no besmirching of the volleyball scene in Top Gun. Thank you very much.
no. I'm saying the first. I think Maverick's a better movie, but I think Top Gun gets
Unquestionably.
too much junk at it. I think the first Top Gun's solid, but both of these movies are monstrous hits, and it's like we're not used to seeing these kind of numbers from a non-superhero movie these days. We've gotten so used to always being the superhero movies, the top bit film making $1 billion+ bucks. Avatar: The Way of Water just goes to show that even though this hasn't become like this massive cultural footprint thing, when you're making Endgame and Infinity War numbers consistently now with these two movies, there's no doubt that the interest is there. Though I do worry that now that supposedly these Avatar movies are going to be coming out about every other year, I do worry if maybe that makes them feel less special, and we'll see the box office go down as they arrive. And I think it could affect its consistent awards recognition. But that aside, I think these two movies are just indicative of this big theme this year of non-superhero, non-MCU formula movies that strike a chord with the public. That people come back and watch them multiple times at the theater. And I think the industry is responding very well to these kind of movies because it shows them that they don't have to just rely on the superhero subgenre to make this kind of money.
Yeah, Luis Mendez joined us. I want to ask you about that, though, because, look, sometimes the exceptions prove the rules. But we look at the exceptions because they stick out. Top Gun stuck out. But then when you start looking at the box office for this year, and Avatar's still only a couple weeks in, so they're not all the way up the list, but they're going to get there. They're currently at 5. Look at the list for the 2022. Top Gun, number 1 with a bullet by a wide margin. It's not close. Worldwide. And domestically, it's even bigger a gap, actually. Jurassic World, the end of that franchise, at least this iteration of it. Then it's Doctor Strange. That's a Marvel movie that was somewhat derisive but performed really well. Minions, that's a franchise. Avatar, we already talked about. Black Panther, that's, another Marvel. Top Gun, though, you only get to do that once. You have to have a 30-year gap. You have to have an aging Tom Cruise. You have to have the nostalgia. You have to have the crowd like me who took their teenagers to see the movie that I saw when I was a kid and loved. That stuff all combined for a perfect movie moment. And then everybody had to wait on it for 2 years. That's an important part of that. Avatar's the same thing. It's 13 years of a wait. And I think there was a lot of curiosity, like, okay, is this really going to be better? Is this really going to be better? And I think you have a point with, is it going to be a depreciating value? But in a way, the successes of those goes to what you're saying. They're the exceptions that prove the rules. Everything else on this list is some version of a sequel or a remake or a remix until you get down to 15 and get to Elvis.
Yeah, and Elvis is kind of a known property because he's an iconic figure.
Right, and we'll touch on Baz in a minute, but that's how far down you got to go before you get to either a video game franchise, a movie franchise, or sequels.
Yeah, I mean, and it is still an issue where a lot of people kind of play it safe and go with the familiar stuff. But the thing is that I do wonder, because we've got these pretty big, major known IPs that are going to have their own films this upcoming year. We've got movies like Barbie. We got movies. We got a Wonka musical coming out, and I do wonder if those known IPs can also do well at the box office, even though they're technically, in a way, basically original ideas. We've never had a Barbie movie before. This Wonka musical is a brand new story. It is by the same folks behind the Paddington movies, so I'm interested to see how that will play out. And we got a Color Purple musical coming out next year. It's going to be very interesting to see if those IPs, those very well-known IPs, can perform just as good at the box office while still being original and not being sequels. But I do agree with you that I think a big part of Top Gun and Avatar's success is the fact that they are kind of these big event things where we haven't seen them in so long. So I do think that there's a bit of a big advantage for them in that. But I don't know. I'm starting to get a lot of hope, and maybe it's I shouldn't be having the hope that I have, but I'm getting some hope that maybe, just maybe, there is a way out of just look. There's plenty of superhero movies. I love 2 superhero movies showed up in my top 25 this year, but I would really like some big blockbuster movies that are not just superhero movies. So this does give me a lot of hope that there is a path forward that have box office success for those kind of movies.
Yeah, Luis Mendez joined us, and that's going to go back to what fits in the cinema and what fits in streaming now. I think that's a big debate that we're all going to continue to have for quite some time, and I think that's a piece of that as well. Luis Mendez joined us. Let's get to your top 2 because they couldn't be any more different. I think one's going to really surprise people. Lots of people have the one you have number 1 probably top of their list. You've got the Batman at number 2, obviously a sequel, more of a reboot, I would think, to call it, than really a franchise thing.
Yeah, it's a straight up reboot.
Number 2 for you. I don't even know where to start with Batman, because I was happy to see this succeed because it was different. And just cards on the table. I'm not a Snyder fan. I didn't like anything that guy did with anything. I just don't like the visual style. You know my thing. I'll spare you my CGI rant for the 18th time.
I'm right there with you. I appreciate that the guy has his own style, but I am not the biggest Snyder fan.
Yeah, I didn't like any of the Snyder stuff. I'm old enough to remember the old Joel Schumacher's and Tim Burton Batmans, which I enjoyed greatly. I think they hold up well when you go back and watch them. Heck, I liked Val Kilmer's Batman. I'll admit it. Batman and Robin was not good, but it was, a popcorn flick. It wasn't as bad as people make it out to be either.
Agreed on all fronts.
I know this is blasphemy to a lot of people because of the immediacy of the moment. Has the Dark Knight era and the Nolan films aged well now that we've got this Batman and it's succeeded with a different bit of vision? Can they coexist, or is people going to have to pick one or the other here?
No, I think they can coexist. I mean, if you look at the Nolan films as sort of their own trilogies, I think it's one of the things that helps Batman is sort of my other all-time favorite fictional character, Godzilla, where you really can. They've done so many different things with the character, and I mean, we've seen everything from Batman in Japan during samurai times. We've seen Batman in London hunting down Jack the Ripper. There's been so many different things that have been done with the character. So I think if you look at it on a separately like that, I think they can coexist. This is a full-blown reboot also. So now I will say that a lot of people have argued that, well, this Batman always got to be dark now. I do think that there's a little bit of a push of, well, DC can't be too lighthearted because that's Marvel. But I think what this movie does so well is that it really is at its heart a detective film. That's compared to while it is dark and more grounded the way the Nolan films were still big, bombastic, blockbuster films. Whereas this is more of a very more take your time, slow burn detective thriller where we're following Batman as he's trying to solve the case, and it kind of gets at what a lot of people some people don't realize about Batman. He's technically not a superhero. He's maybe even not so much a vigilante in some ways as he is sort of his own private detective. And I think that's what this movie does well.
but that's the thing with Batman. It's turned into a superhero movie because superhero movie formula. We just talked about the last 20 years. Batman was noir. Batman
Yes.
was never intended to be a superhero. He was a noir character. He was, the shadow, that kind of a thing. It's warped and developed, and then it goes back to its roots, and then it goes back to being a superhero, and then it goes back to its root. It's a fascinating arc when you go back and look at the roots of Batman. Back in the 50s, before even the campy TV series, it was a phenomenon on college campuses. We have writing in Ordinary Times about this. It was a phenomenon on college campuses, Batman, but it was a noir character. So to see him develop this way, did this movie maybe balance the two of those as close as you could probably do for a modern audience of, yeah, it's a superhero, but let's leave a little bit of the noir in there so it is different?
Oh, I think so, absolutely. Because I do think this is less of a superhero than may film than say the Nolan trilogy. The Nolan trilogy is pretty grounded for Batman compared to some other iterations of the character. But this, like I said, this really does feel like a noir film to some extent. I mean, you can make the movie give it that black and white feel, and you would almost feel like you're watching a 1940s movie of a detective hunting down the killer. And I think that's what this movie does well, but it still has those, over the top characters in there. We get the Penguin, we get Catwoman, we get Riddler. Yeah, they're a little bit different, they're a little bit more grounded, but you still are going to get the things that you love about Batman. But it is done in a way where it really is a straight up detective film. And I think that's why it works so well. I mean, I've seen the movie, I can't even count how many times now. I think like 6 or 7 times now. It is a long movie, it's a 3-hour movie, but it's really become almost like a comfort film for me. And maybe it is because it is a kind of slow burn film. But as someone who just adores the character, I think this is the best Batman we have had, at least since Nolan, especially after having to deal with the Snyder stuff for so long. And it is a welcome to see him go back to those roots. And I think the movie is, I think if you're in whatever you're into Batman for, whether you're into the superheroes, because there is action, there is chase scenes. There's an incredible scene here where he's chasing the Penguin down in the Batmobile. But it is at its heart a detective film.
Yeah, Luis Mendez, film critic, joining us, our resident critic here on Heard Tell. All right, one of the themes of this list, and we've linked to it, ordinary-times.com, my top 25 films of 2022 from Luis Mendez. He also has it at the Mendez Movie Report that you all need to go subscribe to. A lot of women lead movies this year. Lots of them. A lot of really power. I don't envy anybody voting for Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress. They're going to have their hands full this year. Your number one movie, inarguably, was carried by the women in the piece. It is such a creative movie. The first couple people, we have a couple different people that write for movies at Ordinary Times, and y'all could not be different in personalities, and both of you just gushed over this thing. So I was like, okay, now we got to see what this thing is. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Obviously, a very strong female lead in the movie, but everything about this is how many streams does this movie cross to be successful? It's action, it's a little bit of Hong Kong action, it's got a lot of ribald humor in it, it's got a lot of effects in it, and it's got a lot of a really personal story that still hits you in the feels despite all the craziness. How do you pitch this movie to somebody who still hasn't seen it yet? Because Everything Everywhere All at Once is kind of a descriptor of what this thing's like. Anything you want in a movie, you're going to find it in this movie, and you call it a modern masterpiece.
Yeah, and I think it's a very potentially very important movie that could be it could sure join the list of movies like King Kong, Jaws, The Matrix, films that tend to get name dropped as to what made movie makers want to make movies. And I think this has the potential to be one of those movies. This is the kind of movie that I think can really bridge the gap also between sort of like all these niche fandoms and type of movie fans that have come out of the modern era. It's like I said this in a written piece I did for it at Ordinary Times, where I feel like if you get someone who thought No Way Home deserved the Best Picture nomination, and then you get someone who thought that that's blasphemy to claim that, they would both more likely than not love this movie. It really is the kind of movie that can bridge that gap because in a way, it's almost like a superhero movie at times. You're dealing with with the multiverse, the effects here. There's a super villain and everything, but it's also like a family drama that is disguised as like a quasi superhero movie. It's got comedy, it's got action, it's absurd, it's surreal, it's got romance, and the way that they do the romance is not like we usually are used to. It's a very different type of romance that they do here. It's got incredible emotion at the end of the film. It really is amazing that they pulled off what they did with this movie, and that it has been as successful as it's been. It's a small A24 independent movie that ended up picking up legs and made over $100 million. It's actually one of the higher performing awards films of the year. It's gaining traction. A lot of casual friends that have gone and seen it have come back to me with glowing reviews. They're constantly asking me about what are its Oscar prospects are. It's right now in the thick of it to potentially go all the way and win Best Picture, which is nuts to think about because you wouldn't think this is the kind of movie that wins Best Picture at the Oscars. It's cleaning up with critics at the moment too, so we're really pushing the movie as much as we can. It's just a movie that I think is for everybody. And it almost speaks to the time also. I think it also speaks to our time of the kind of movies everybody's watching, the way people are feeling a little bit nihilistic at the moment and cynical about things. It really tackles everything.
Yep, Luis Mendez. That's his top 25 movies. The entire list is on ordinary-times.com. Also, Mendez Movie Report, where he has not only his list, he has most of these reviewed individually. If you go back through them, he always does great work. We're going to be talking to you a lot next couple of weeks as we get into the award season. My friend, you do great work. Let folks know where they can follow you, where they can keep up, where they can subscribe to the Substack, and how they can keep up with you until we get you back on Hertel here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so you can check me out on my Substack, Mendez Movie Report.substack.com. It is 100% free. I don't charge anyone to read it. You can also find me on social media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or if you have a letterbox, if you have a Hive social, Mendez Movie RPT. You can find me there. I write my reviews. I constantly project the Oscars. And I'm hoping to expand to do a little bit more other stuff over on YouTube, which is finally starting to come together behind the scenes. But yeah, I'm all about the movies. That's what I would like to write about.
Yep, and we'll be there for all of those things because we love your work, my friend. We'll talk again soon. Luis Mendez, Mendez Movie Report. Appreciate you, sir.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir.